Welcome everyone to Midday Meditation. Last month I talked about the eternal intrinsic energies of consciousness. I talked about the mind, and I talked about the intellect, and I talked about the storage area where we store both memories of our experiences in life, but also in the storage area, there's a permanent part, which is the qualities of the soul, the eternal qualities of the soul: peace, love, purity, wisdom, bliss, power, happiness, love. These are all there all the time. And it gets confusing because our eternal qualities are there all the time. But then we also we put into the bucket memories of experiences that we have. And so this week, I wanted to talk about another player in consciousness who's not a permanent part of consciousness, but rather a creation of ours. And that's the ego. And the ego is a very, very important part of consciousness, because if we don't know who we are, we create an identity, and that identity then becomes the ego. And the identity is based on the body, what we do in the material world, who we know in the material world, what other people in the material world think of us. And so this ego, which we have created, is limited to the material world. The ego cannot access our original qualities. So this is a problem because the ego kind of runs the show most of the time. And the ego wants to understand and make sense of things. I mentioned yesterday that the ego gets very confused because the ego believes that we are good, but then we do things that are not good, or people see us as not good, and it's very confusing for the ego. The ego doesn't understand that it's the soul that's intrinsically good. Ego can't understand the soul. So when the ego tries to understand things, the ego mixes up facts and imagination and can't see the difference between them. So, for example, a fact might be, I'm going to meet you for coffee. And we say a place and we say a time, and I go there and I sit and I wait and you don't show up. So the fact is, I went there and you did not. But the ego's trying to understand, this doesn't make sense to me. We said we were going to meet and this person didn't come. So then the ego will start imagining reasons. It's because you don't care enough about me to remember, or it's because something real disaster happened and you're in a terrible condition right now. It's because you don't really consider me to be a friend. It's because you weren't even considering going. You just said that to me. The ego will create these imaginary reasons, and then it will mix together the fact that you didn't come and the imaginary reasons, and it won't be able to see that one is fact and one is fiction. So that's another reason why the ego is always dealing with problems. And so when the ego is managing our consciousness, it's just one problem after another. And if there is no problem, then the ego will start thinking about problems of the past. Oh, this person did this, it wasn't right. I did this, it didn't work right, I failed. So we want to understand the limitations of the ego. And sometimes the ego will be absolutely certain, I'm right, this is right. And then later on, we find out that we actually weren't right. And so we have to be very careful about the ego also, because if there's any kind of a disagreement between two people, it's probably a disagreement between two egos. And both of the egos have limited ability to reason, to understand. And both of the egos have limited ability to see another person's point of view. The ego just, it can't do that. It has a very limited range of vision. And so we don't have to get upset at our own ego, and we don't have to get upset at the other person's ego, because that's what egos are. That's what egos do. But instead, we want to use that as an opportunity to reject the ego and take my awareness to the higher self. Because the higher self then can access the intellect. The higher self, if I make myself peaceful, I make the mind quiet, I detach, I give myself a little bit of space from my emotions, then we can access the intellect. And the intellect can help not only understand, but be creative and come up with a good solution. So, always the first step when there's any kind of heat between myself and another person, to recognize it's two egos. If one person is operating from the ego and the other person is not, then there won't be that heat. The person who's not operating from the ego will be able to maintain peace and quiet and will be able to listen and sort things out. But usually, one ego, the energy of one ego triggers the energy of another ego. So we want to empower the higher self, empower our good qualities, and keep them close in our awareness, so that if I notice some kind of, I'm getting heated inside, I'm getting into some kind of a conflict, I know this is dangerous territory because my ego is clashing with somebody else's ego, and that's only going to create problems. And then the ego will spend days and weeks and months thinking about those problems. So we'd like to be problem free, which means really we have to keep a tight lid on the ego. So to do that, though, of course, we need spiritual power. The more spiritual awareness and spiritual power we have, the less power the ego has. So today we will meditate together on the powers of the higher self. To begin with, sit up straight. Take a few deep, full, easy breaths. As you inhale, fill the mind with lightness. As you inhale, fill the heart with happiness. As you inhale, fill the intellect with peace. I am a peaceful being, a happy being, and I'm very light. I sit invisibly behind the forehead. Incredible energy generated by this tiny little spark of conscious energy that I am. I am the peaceful soul who lives in the body. And I keep bringing myself back to the place of peace. Because when I'm peaceful, I can know myself, the inner being. If I'm not peaceful, that means the ego is running the show and I'm seeing a false version of myself. Peace. We all have egos. We all created egos with good intentions, but naivete. We didn't understand who we are. We all have very powerful egos, but there's no power as great as the power of the goodness of the soul, the eternal indigenous qualities of the soul have more power even than the ego. And so we put our attention and our awareness in these qualities. Because when they're strong, the ego gets weak. We don't fight with the ego because the ego would win. Ego is very good at fighting. But we use the power of peace to help the ego become quiet. See yourself as a being of peace. Let the energy of peace flow. And recognize that you, the soul, have enormous resources for dealing with life. You have the energy of love, which is how you connect with other souls. And you have the energy of joy, which makes everything that you do special. You have the energy of purity, which gives you your self-respect. And you have the energy of wisdom, which guides you and gives you your security. We are powerful souls, and our power is in all of the various forms of goodness within us. And goodness is the fundamental truth of the universe. And so, with truth, the ego fades because the ego can't grasp truth. It doesn't belong in the dimension of truth. So, as we contemplate the truth of the soul, the ego fades. I am a being of love. And even when the ego is controlling me, I still meet the ego with love. I never let the ego force me to lose my love. Ego can't understand love. Ego doesn't know the importance of love. Ego might even think that love gets in the way. But the truth of the soul is that we are all beings of love. And the more pure and altruistic our love is, the better our interactions with others are. And also, the purer and more altruistic our love is, the more we can love ourselves. We love everything about the self that is connected with truth. The ego exists, the ego is very strong, but the ego isn't part of truth. So when we're in the place of truth, we're not intimidated by the ego, not even influenced by the ego. And in that place of our own truth, we can grasp the existence of a being who is eternally good, a being outside of this world of matter, a being who never changes and who's like a beacon for us, a being who can connect us with our own truth, a being who's always in the state of truth. A being who has no ego and who has never had ego. A purely altruistic being. Let yourself, the tiny soul, fly to the home of light silently. See yourself in the dimension with no objects. There's no ego when we're in the dimension of light. Only the eternal intrinsic parts of the self can be there. And see yourself in the presence of the most loving being. The being who is completely trustworthy because this being has never had an ego. This being is pure goodness. And every vibration that comes from this being is grace. See yourself very close to this supremely loving parent, spiritual parent, a being who is gentle and also powerful, and truthful and also inspiring. We all want to live truth. We all want the company of those who are truthful. Stay for a moment, a couple of moments, in the company of the completely truthful being. The one whose love is unconditional. It doesn't matter what I'm doing or not doing. That doesn't in any way affect the flow of God's love. It's always flowing. always available. Always sweet. Now, very gently bring your awareness back to the material world, the other dimension, which is very different. And the wonder of the soul is that we can experience both. We can experience the material dimension, and we can experience the dimension of light. And we can even experience both of them at the same time. When there's absolutely no ego present, we can experience both at the same time. I, the peaceful, eternal soul, am in this body experiencing life. Om Shanti. Now for the blessing for tonight. There's a nice flower garden and some sun. And your blessing says, you are a wise soul who overcomes challenges, not with force or rejection, but with love and acceptance. That's a wise soul who can overcome a challenge with acceptance. You are a wise soul who overcomes challenges, not with force or rejection, but with love and acceptance. Thank you all for joining.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. And I have an invitation for you. We have a very special speaker coming on Thursday evening. His name is Brother Ken, and he's coming from Brazil. He was one of the very first Western people to join the Brahma Kumaris. So he's a wise yogi. And also professionally, he was a management consultant specializing in leadership and organizational development. And so he's coming to Chicago, and he's going to meet with us on Thursday evening, kind of informally. He was one of our main teachers in the retreat that I just attended in New York. And he talked a lot about the mind, very interesting things about the mind. So I'll ask him to talk a little bit about that on Thursday. And I sent those of you for whom I have an email ID, I think I sent you all an invitation because it has a different Zoom link. But if I did not send you an invitation, then I'm sorry that you're not on the list, but you let me know and I'll put you on the list and I'll definitely send you an invitation. You can either come in person or you can come on Zoom. And it's 7 to about 8:15 or so. Okay?
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.